Okay, so College Board also likes to talk about the Second Great Awakening. That's a question they seem to go back to frequently. So let's just talk about the first and second Great Awakening. We have some similarities, we have some differences. So first Great Awakening, remember this is happening in the 1700s. And at this point, the two biggest Christian denominations in America are Puritans and Anglicans. Where do the Puritans live? Mostly New England. And Anglicans live where? Yeah, mostly in the South. Okay, Virginia, North Carolina, stuff like that. Okay, so especially the Puritan church is very exclusive. In who can become a member. There's all these rules for, like, in order to become a member of the church, you have to be baptized, and you have to be kind of born into the situation. It's very difficult for someone to join the church. Okay. So we get to the 1730s, and first of all, we have these what are called itinerant preachers who will travel and preach. They'll go around the countryside and they'll preach their messages, which is very different than what the Puritans and Anglicans were doing. These churches, the main staple, you have a pastor stays at your church, and they're like there, right? They don't leave and travel around and anything. But now we have people like George Whitefield, who is a British preacher who's coming around. He's like the first big celebrity, remember? And he's going around, and people said like he was one of the best speakers they've ever heard in their lives. People would come from all over just to hear him. Even people who were not necessarily religious, like Benjamin Franklin, would come and listen and give all the money they had to him. We also have preachers kind of preaching in a new style, and that's called the Jeremiad. They focus on sin and punishment. Okay, Jonathan Edwards is one of the most famous examples of this. He gave the sermon called "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God," and people loved it. Right? It's kind of this idea like, oh, I'm being saved, but I don't have to worry about all this other stuff that's going to happen to the sinners out there. And this is going to help to bring more people in, but also churches are going to begin to open membership more. We don't really need to know how they did that or anything. There's some specific things that we don't need to get into, but they're going to begin to open up membership to make it easier to become come into the church, and that's going to also increase membership. So more people are coming to the church here in the 1730s than there were before. Okay, so fast forward to the 1830s, and the religious makeup of the country has changed just a little bit. The Puritans now go by Congregationalists. Anglicans, they're not connected to the British anymore because of the independence movement, but now they're the Episcopalians. But regardless, there's still kind of some primary denominations. And so what happens in the 1830s is that people begin to split denominations or sects based off of a variety of things. Some of them could be religious ideas. Like a common argument is over baptism. The Bible is not very explicit on how baptism should work, and so some sects say, "Oh, it can only be for infants." Oh, no, it can only be for adults. Oh, it has to be sprinkled water on top. Nope, you got to dunk them underwater. So churches would divide over various issues, and that's just one issue. That's just baptism. There's plenty of other religious things to argue about. And so denominations will split because of that, but also split because of social issues in the world, especially when it comes to slavery. And so denominations will split whether they support the issue of slavery or not. And so with these split denominations, these churches are becoming much more reflective of their members. So in the 1700s, it was, this is what we're doing. This is what the church says. You have to fit to that. But now in the 1830s, now we're having churches who are kind of saying like, well, we're going to believe in this, and because that's what our members believe. Okay, we're kind of changing maybe our preaching, maybe our fundamental beliefs based on what our members are following and believing. We have a lot of itinerant preachers again, a lot of mass meetings where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people will show up and listen to preaching outside. And one thing that the College Board likes to connect with the Great Awakening is its connection to the social movements of the 1840s. So these people through the Great Awakening are looking at social and religious ideas differently. They're challenging maybe authority of the established church. And so they're looking at then also, how can we challenge these social norms that needs to be fixed? And so we look at things like prisons or insane asylums. And they're like, how can we make these better? How can we make them more humanizing places? Some would look towards abolition and how they can be a part of that movement as well. So I've mentioned the first, mentioned the second. Some will also say that there is a third Great Awakening. That happens in the 1950s. 1950s, we have a growth of church membership. So we have people like Billy Graham, who will do the itinerant preaching, right? We're seeing this common thread, right? Going around and preaching, going around and preaching, going around and preaching. He did this through his, he called them crusades, where they go and talk about his message. Graham in the 1950s would take a different method here. In the 1950s, they're much more focused on this idea of personal salvation. So in the 1800s, 1700s, it's more of like you are fitting into the church. And now in the 1950s, it's more like, no, the church or God is coming to you. And so that's a different message. And that's going to really resonate with Americans in the 1950s, especially when we're also dealing with the Cold War. The Soviet Union is unabashedly atheistic in the 1950s. And so America is trying to set themselves apart and show a difference between the godless atheists and the Christian nation of the United States. And so that's why they add things like in God we trust, not in God we trust, sorry. They add under God into the Pledge of Allegiance and stuff like that. That's their message. They're trying to separate themselves from atheistic Russia. And we also have television, television preachers, Graham and others, as the television becomes more widely available, we use television to preach to gain even wider audience. So if you're looking at religious changes, these are kind of the biggest religious changes we see. Okay, Gilded Age. So when I think about Gilded Age, I think of like just how I teach it and teaching it in different themes. So immigration, industrialization, urbanization, and then after this, you can look at all the progressive change efforts, right? So immigration in the Gilded Age, this is from like 1870 to 1910-ish, something like that, World War I. So immigration, at this time we have the new immigrants coming from Eastern and Southern Europe. Not only bringing different cultures, different religion, different languages. And so many of the new immigrants are going to settle down in big cities on East Coast. Most are coming over for low-skilled, low-paying jobs. Many of them are factory jobs in these big cities. And so factories are getting bigger. There's going to be more of them. These factories need more labor, and so they're going to hire the immigrants. And all these factories are in the big cities. What ends up happening is many of these factories in the big cities are surrounded by these apartment buildings built in like the 1850s and 60s and just are never fixed up. They're running down as time goes on, as more and more people are moving in. They become known as tenement apartments, and a lot of them are 30, 40 years old. There's like no running water. Okay. They're all made out of wood structure, no electricity. That means you need to use kerosene lanterns, and kerosene lanterns in a wood structure with lots of people in it is not a good situation. You have to live in these tenements or tenements because they're the ones that are close to the factories. Because most of the immigrants that are coming over don't have the money to pay for a horse or other means of transportation. So that means you have to walk to work, which means you have to live in the tenements that are closer to the factories. And so many immigrants would live in ethnic communities. These are neighborhoods within the big city where like all the Polish immigrants will live in this Polish neighborhood, or all the Russian immigrants would move into the Russian neighborhood. And that's to develop organization, to help each other. They created like aid societies, help each other out. These factories are hiring immigrants, they're making more and more money. And so factories are looking for bigger ways that they can make more money. And the best way to make money is to become a monopoly or a trust. Because if you have control over your whole industry, you can make the most money. So the way that you can do that is things like horizontal integration, where you take out your competitors, or vertical integration, where you control your supply chain. And we see lots of different businesses do this. Carnegie, what's his business? What is he selling? Steel. And Rockefeller, who's selling what? Oil. Okay, in these factories, they are going to be, because they're hiring immigrants, they can pay them low wages, and they don't really care about things like good working conditions. Right? Someone complains about the working conditions, they complain about low pay, they'll just get fired, and one of the other immigrants who are looking for a job will get hired. And so what workers will do in response to that is create labor unions. The idea is that they can collectively bargain. So they can work together and bargain for better wages, better working conditions. But if the management does not want to negotiate, workers might go on strike, where they refuse to work. And the hope is that the lack of production will become more expensive than it would be for the businesses to pay for their workers more or to better the working conditions. Unfortunately for the workers, though, oftentimes the government would work with management try to put down the strikes. We see this time and time again. And so depending on the labor union you're talking about, the membership would increase. One of the big turning points, though, is at Haymarket Square, where there was a big strike going on, and one man named Albert Parsons was giving a speech, and Albert Parsons was saying, "We need to go and basically fight for what we want." You know, and he says, two arms, which means like, go get your gun, basically. And later that night, a group of anarchists came with the labor unions and threw bombs at the police officers, killing some. And so this led to this equalization of, oh, if you're in a labor union, you must be a radical or an anarchist. Okay, and that's going to be this supposition that's going to exist for a long time, right? We see this in the 1920s as well. After World War I, oh, if you join a labor union, you must be a radicalist, right? You must be like a communist, a Bolshevist, they would say. And so we see this equalization, this assumption for quite a while. Other thing I want to mention for urbanization is the growth of political machines. So who's in charge of a political machine? A boss. Okay, and the most famous boss we talked about in class was who? Boss Tweed, right? Not just him, but political machines are designed to organize, to keep and maintain power. So they do things like bribery, election fraud, and oh, I lost my thing. You take money from Kickbacks, thank you. Kickbacks, where you're taking money from, public money, keeping it for yourself. A Boss Tweed was a pro at that. But what took down Boss Tweed, or who took down? Thomas Nast. How did you do that? Through political cartoons. Progressives are going to push back against political machines as well. One of the ways they do that is by saying things like, oh, let's create a civil service exam. Where you have to take a test in order to work for the government. So you're actually capable of doing your job. They're also going to institute more political changes like direct primary, recall elections, referendum, and so on. Okay. Questions here? Okay, and